Let's take a look at your final project drafts. Some people I gave feedback in person, so some of the files that I look at here may be a little bit outdated, but we can kind of combine, I guess, some of my suggestions if they're different here with the suggestions that I gave you in person. Let's start here with Laura's. Um, I'm missing this font, which is fine for now. I believe that we have, oops, wrong thing. Um, if I can get to the right, here we go. If you can see in the PDF, we have this kind of cool font. In future, for the drafts, it's not a big deal. For the finals, what I would suggest to do is to create outlines on this font. And that is fairly easy to do. Basically, all you do, I can't really do it right now because I don't have the font. So if I select, nothing's really going to happen. But if you select your text, again, I would kind of keep, I've said it before during the semester, I would keep a copy off to the side that's editable before you outline your type. What you can do is I'm holding down Option here and I'm just kind of moving that off to the side and just kind of keep that editable just in case you would want to edit that later. When you export, as long as you use artboards, none of this will export along with your PDF and all that. So that's fine. It's kind of like the same thing as Illustrator. Anyway, so what we do is we would select your text and then under type, create outlines. It's grayed out for me because I don't have the font. But create outlines, and then that turns it into a shape rather than text. When you package, it's also going to collect any fonts that you used. My personal preference is, even though it packages things, is to outline fonts for final production anyway. Just that way you don't have any kind of like formatting issues. It's just sort of like a personal thing. Some designers do it, some don't. I prefer to outline all my fonts regardless within the entire document, just so that I know my formatting isn't going to shift or anything like that, so it's no longer text. Anyway, all that aside, I think this is a really strong start. I like this opening page that you have. I'll scroll through the InDesign document. Good use of images here. They flow really well. The text flows again from this sort of one column text block flowing around the images into this right column text block. And again, the images and the text flow really well here together. Not a whole lot of feedback on these couple of pages, to be honest. This one, I thought, I like ending it. We talked about it in class, ending it with sort of discography. And I think this one was when I gave some feedback in person as well. I thought that potentially maybe scaling this frame down to 2 columns may have that text flow a little bit better, maybe not. It might be a little bit too rigid. I like the idea of having it sort of creep into this this column. I think kind of having it go across all of the columns, kind of like this one, might be a little much there. It's a little bit image heavy there. If anything, I might play with the idea of scaling this down to go across. Obviously, you'd have to rescale the image, but to maybe go a little bit smaller, or even, kind of go across the middle of this column. Again, you'd have to reformat that frame slightly, or even have this one go, maybe a little bit more, or even just like a touch less. It's kind of like nitpicky-ish. I might try having this be 3 columns here, just so it kind of sticks, since you have this sort of skinnier column here. And if you had this be a column and then this be a column, it might read a little bit better. I think it kind of wants to read, across going this way. I see what you did here. It makes sense to have 1 column, and then even here, it kind of makes sense to have 1 column. But I feel that like here, having this be across 2 columns and this on 1 column is a little bit tricky visually. I might try it again. Try this as 1 column, or rather 2 columns instead of 1 column. But other than that, I think that this works really well. I would just make sure that we're checking our links, make sure when we're using, this goes for everybody too, when we're using the copy, I want to make sure that you guys are placing your copy within the document rather than copying and pasting it from Word. What happens a lot when you copy and paste texts rather than linking an article or linking the body text, what ends up happening is formatting gets strange, and then you could potentially lose some text, things like that. So just make sure it should be showing up. If you did, I apologize, but it should be showing up in our links column here, the Word file. And then I just wanted to double check your text threading. I like to have threading on for a little bit to double check and just make sure you can see. This one's short, but you can see where text frames are threading to each other. So yeah, other than those minor suggestions, I know we talked a little bit in class, but I think that this looks great overall. If anything, with that headline, sort of lastly, I might see if we can make that not bigger, but maybe a little bit bolder, or even have some sort of graphic behind it. It's a little bit with how these images work really well together. It's a little bit, I don't know if light is the right word. Even if we made, even if you didn't underline of Western civilization, or even have the foundation of on the first line and then Western civilization not underlined and a little bit heavier, a little bit more bold, if you can do that with this font. If not, there's a couple tricks that we can do. But just to kind of like make this headline a little bit more dynamic, even have the Western civilization at an angle might work. But yeah, aside from some minor visual tweaks, I think that this is an excellent start. All right, then going on to Noah's. This one, there was a little bit, not a ton to check out, but I think that you have a decent start. So format-wise, there's a couple of different things to start with here. We want to make sure that we're starting on page 2, technically, so that we have 3 spreads rather than 1 page on starting and ending. So that you can change fairly easily in document setup. And then over here, you'll see all of our document stuff. So we want our start page to be page 2. And as I tabbed, now you can see everything kind of switches. And now you can kind of see how the pages flow a little bit more into each other. So you might have to reformat a little bit. I think overall with this design, what we want to do is we want to have, instead of just the title of the magazine here, you can run it across the bottom, kind of like a normal magazine. So if we had, at the bottom, juxtapose, and then that can link to their website to be your external link, and then page numbers and the publication date, which could just be May 2023. But we need a sort of a more creative headline there. I think the font is kind of cool. I think you could, you could work with what you kind of have sort of started there, but just sort of redo it with a headline rather than the article name. And I think overall, I see what you're doing with the sort of having the even photos, and that could work. It's a little bit static. I might try, once you get the text in there, I might try formatting it, maybe having, this one down here, so that way you could have text flow this way, and then even, every other sort of like that, if you wanted, if there was a reason that you had the photos large like that, and then even have maybe one ending, that way. But if you're going to have the, I'll go undo. If you're going to have the images kind of set like this, I would make sure that they're roughly, well, I shouldn't say roughly, I would make sure that they're the same size and placement just so everything is really consistent. I know we really didn't want to crop the photos. We can crop a tiny bit, but I would just make sure that all of the photos are even if you're going to have this be a design choice. And for this one, I might definitely have all three photos be about the same size, or be the same size. And then I might have this be down here. And then this kind of gives you room to have sort of your title page, if you wanted to have your headline and like some intro copy. But if you're going to have the images sort of even like this, make sure that they're even, that they're the same size or they're in the same placements. And then you're going to have to be pretty dynamic with your text, just so that you don't have a really static layout, again, sort of keeping in mind the subject matter and the publication and all that. And again, don't forget about your interactivity with your previous and next page buttons and all of the information that needs to be in there for the publication, and also obviously your copy. But yeah, I would say graphically, if you're going to have sort of a relatively clean, simplified image like this or set of images like this, you're going to have to play around with the copy to make it a bit more dynamic so that the entire layout isn't sort of so static. All right. And then Amanda's, I know she's updated it since I've looked at this. I gave her some feedback in class, but I wanted to make sure I showed it to you because I really like this use of graphics. She ended up changing this a little bit, so that there's this kind of like corner notch here, that sort of gives it a little bit kind of more visual personality. But I really liked the idea of pulling the colors, first of all, from the logo. So you have this maroon and yellow outline, kind of like their logo. We worked on kind of offsetting these, making these a little bit smaller in general. And again, the text is going to be a little bit wonky, but as I stretch. But we kind of worked on potentially having these frames offset, so it gives it a little bit more of a dynamic look. We made the text captions a bit smaller, adjusted the imagery, and then we definitely adjusted where we have just one solid column of text here. Instead of having like three large pages of text, we broke it up a little bit. I suggested to break up these columns for sure, to have the text sort of flow into each other and around the images. But I really wanted to show you this sort of first iteration, again, because I really like the page numbers, how she had them set up, the graphics, using the color, using the frames, the edges of the frames as a design element, I think work really well together. And I know you're working on, after in-person feedback, you're working on your final draft. It looks much different than this, but keeps some of the same elements that we're working with. But I'm excited to see what you do with the finished piece. All right. Going on to Zach's. Again, here we want to make sure that we're starting with page 2. Again, we can go into our document setup. Make sure here that we're starting on page 2 so that we have 3 spreads and facing pages rather than this one page off by itself. That's a little bit further than I'd like it to be. So here, I like this beginning. I like having the main image, full page image with the bleed on one side. I think that's a really cool idea and kind of a nod to his artwork. I would I would come up with a different headline. This sort of it seems as more of like a magazine cover, where this is really going to be the start of an article. Even if you had, this, the finest works of Richard Prince, even if you had this be the finest works, and then you could have like of Richard Prince, kind of how you have it small. Oh, here, I'll move it around. In a similar way, you could make this a little bit bigger, or even, use this font because it's a little bit darker. But if you had, something similar here, the finest works of Richard Prince, something like that, to give it a little bit more of a lead in. I don't, again, I think that's a really strong start. I think it, again, is kind of like a nod to his work, et cetera, et cetera. And then I think obviously we're missing a lot of copy here. You want to make sure that you're using the copy from the zip file. I think you copied and pasted from the article description, which is understandable, but we want to make sure that we're paying attention to the assignment specifics. And I like, it's kind of set up as more of sort of a retrospective, I think, which might work for a page or two. It's going to depend on how you set up the copy. So like this about page, the info would change obviously because we would have again the copy that's provided. But I think this idea of having a couple of pages, like if you had one page image like this and then another page text. Or even if we didn't do it so checkerboard, if we had, again, we want to make sure that we watch our cropping. If you had a few, oops, I'm hitting the wrong thing. If you had a few spots, as I'm moving stuff around here and not talking, sorry. If we had a few spots to add text, I mean, this might be a little bit too rigid, but you get the idea. If you had something set up like this to where you could have copy, flow around, you had a column, and then, more dynamic use of text on this side, and then even pull these images and have them maybe on this page and then have copy here. And again, maybe with our first spread, you could have, this image. Oops, is that locked? I believe so. Have an image in the upper corner, and then your intro, the article, etc. But I think that this one is going to really rely on getting that body copy in there and how the text is going to flow around the images. I think you have a really strong start. Again, like I said, with this intro page or intro spread, even could potentially turn into a really good intro spread. And then depending on how you handle the text and images once you get the copy in there, you might have to edit down some of the images that you use, like the amount of images that you used. But overall, I think a decent idea, decent start. Again, look at the assignment specifics, make sure that we're using the copy that's provided along with those image files. And then you can place that again right into your text frames. You can place it just like you place an image. This way it's linked text. So in theory, if a writer makes changes to that file, then those changes are reflected in your linked document. All right. And we'll take a look at Alexis's. Just sort of scrolling through to show you. I think graphically this is a really strong start. Again, sort of similar things that I was saying before to others. I'm missing this font again for the draft, no big deal. We can talk about it when we meet next, but I might, again, sort of keep a copy of this off to the side and then outline your text by highlighting it and then type create outlines. So this way it's a shape rather than editable text, but I like to keep an editable version off to the side. But yeah, I think graphically it's a pretty strong start. I like the use of color, how you have this graphic band across the bottom on all pages, and then even use of it at the top here to fill in some space. And I think having it sort of behind some of the things here, like you have in your headline, I might also come up with with a headline rather than just his name. And then you try I think for this page, having this block of text kind of makes sense, but I would try looking at, let's see if we have, oh, we are in preview, okay. When you have your columns in here, with a base of 3, or you can use more columns, but again, we'll have multiples of 3, and there's an example of this a little bit later. I might break this one up either into 2 columns or 3 columns, depending. I think having these large blocks of text are a little bit more static. Again, here it sort of makes sense to have these two the way you have the images and the text flowing around the images. I think it makes sense to have 2 columns here, and then maybe even break this up into 2 columns just to see, so these pages kind of flow a little bit into each other. And then again, similarly here, I think the way that the text flows around these images, having more than 1 column here rather than blocks of text, I think are going to help kind of visually sort of flow better, I guess. And then lastly, well, not lastly, almost lastly, you need to make sure we're definitely squishing images here. We've kind of squished Richard here. You want to make sure that when you're scaling that you're either using your scale tool, or if you're dragging, like if you're selecting and you're dragging the corners, you want to make sure that you're holding shift so that you don't stretch the photo like this, like we're squishing it. So like it's definitely disproportionate here. This one I know is disproportionate. I understand why you did that, to sort of like fit the frame and everything in there. But we want to make sure that we're definitely similar to logos. We want to make sure that we're not stretching photos and artwork. So just make sure that all of your images are at 100% rather than squished. And then lastly, I see you have some of the interactivity here with our next and previous buttons. We just want to make sure that we don't forget the publication information. So this would be Juxtapose magazine, and then the publication date, May 2023. And then if we have, make sure that we are including our bookmarks, which are easy to add. And then a hyperlink, which is easy to add. The hardest of the interactivity is the buttons, which you already have in there. So I think just some formatting with text, and making sure that images aren't distorted. I think this could be a very strong piece. All right. All right, then we have Morgan's. I think overall, a really strong visual start. The somewhat unfortunate thing is that it's the wrong orientation, so we want to make sure in our document setup, you have your page starting properly. We want to make sure that our orientation is actually portrait rather than landscape. It's sort of makes sense, I guess, when you're thinking in terms of a spread to have it landscape, but it's kind of like 2 portrait sides, a left and a right, kind of make one larger landscape spread, if that makes sense, if that's the reason that you did that. But so what we're going to do is just make sure that you switch that orientation, which is fairly easy to do. And then the unfortunate part is now you can see you're going to have to change all of your formatting. But it could still potentially work. I think that having, I think you have a very strong intro page with this visual. So even if you had, this image across the top, and even if you brought the frame in, it wouldn't take a ton of changing. But even if you brought, your frame in, and I'm using my selection tool to go to the bleed here, and then, oops. I just moved them by accident. I'm trying to find the edge of that frame, but you get the idea. You could still have potentially that same or similar, you might need to move this logo. Oops, as I grabbed the wrong thing. You might need to move this logo somewhere else, either down bottom right, so we're not covering anybody, or even give or take, see where that, obviously we don't want to cover faces, but see where you want to move that to, even if we moved these guys over. So if you can do an upper, give or take, upper left, lower left, etc. So you'll have to reformat things a little bit, obviously. But I think that will also help. Having to reformat will also kind of help. I'm going to go back to the wrong orientation just to kind of show you. Here we go. I was going to minimize that, but that's as minimum as it goes. Yeah, I think for your intro page, again, obviously with the format flipping a little bit, it's going to change things. But I think having this visual is pretty strong. I might stylize your headline a bit. You could even have, the headline go across either these two columns or 2/3. So if you had like the fate of rock, and then even kind of started your article in a similar way, I think just designing that headline a little bit more, again, changing the formatting is going to change that up a bit. But I think that you have a cool idea here going here with how the columns are. The only thing that one of the things that I would keep an eye out for is, like, if this was a pull quote, I would make it, very different. Even go with like a serifed font or sans serif font rather than a serif font. Go with like a bolder font if you wanted to make that stand out as something different. But I think here, like if you wanted to change, like have all the lyrics, like I feel like this might be where you're going. Like if you had all of your lyrics a certain size, again, we could go to character styles if you wanted to create a character style for just the lyrics. And then if you wanted to go to like a Helvetica, a Helvetica bold. I mean, obviously you might need to change the formatting a little bit, but if you had like a Helvetica bold italics a little bit for just the text. So even here, if you had, or rather the lyrics rather. So if you had this here, so that way there's a clear kind of delineation between body copy and lyrics. I know it's all body copy, but just some formatting suggestions to really make those sort of stick out, aside from just increasing the font a little bit. But yeah, I think overall I like the selection of images. I like how you have your columns set up. Again, I think treating something, you have some fonts like this is really small. And then that's a little bit larger. So you want to make sure that your fonts are consistent. This is where character styles can help a lot. So if you had, like a body copy and then lyrics, or section headings, things like that, this is where those character styles can really help. So you can select, a block of text and then hit that character style to sort of make sure that everything is formatted the same. Really just consistency with the fonts. And again, here with a similar look as to these pages, my suggestion for doing something like this, I might try it with maybe the middle page or spread or the last spread, but I might try swapping these. So you had text left, image center, and then here image, well, not center, but image left, text right. So there's a little bit of differentiation between this spread and this spread, or maybe try this one with the middle and then have the last spread end like that, just to kind of like mix it up a little bit. But I think overall, a really good start. I think some text formatting is really going to help here to differentiate between lyrics and body copy. Make sure that body copy is consistent. And then lastly, probably more importantly, make sure that your size is correct. Again, the format going from landscape to portrait is going to shift things significantly, but I think overall, not too bad with some rearranging. All right. Then we have Eileen's. Here I like to see, here you can see she went with more columns technically, but still working with that multiple of 3, which is really cool. So you can see we have 6 columns per page, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And this way she can break out like have this graphic go across all 6 columns, and then this intro page kind of follows suit. A really nice pull quote with some graphics. And then I'll kind of like scroll through, and then we can see our blocks of text and our images, I think, work really well. Again, another really strong graphic idea with our line work here, working with the images really well. Just some minor kind of suggestions here. I'm going to go to preview so we can see everything with the bleed. There we go. So now you can see your trim and your bleeds and all that, and how the graphics go off of the page. I think for this page, I like your start page. I think it's really great. I think this pull quote works really well. I might try to format this potentially a little bit. Let me scroll through and just show you guys this whole thing without all of the columns in the way before I start moving things around. Again, you can see how the bleeds work really well. Graphically, everything works really well. And then I'll go back to regular normal view mode. So now I can move things around potentially. Oh, it looks like things are locked. Well, maybe not. Oh, are these on the parent pages? Is that why? Nope. Interesting. I'm not sure why I can't select anything. Oh, because everything's locked. That's why. Okay, that makes sense. Let me unlock. Ooh, I'm turning off visibility rather than unlocking. All right, so let's unlock. I'm just going to unlock everything just so we can see. And I missed something here. There we go. Just so I can play around and mess up your whole thing. So I think largely, I think this is a great setup, an awesome intro. The only thing I think missing here is a headline, which you can easily work in. So I was going to say about this text here. Oops, I just did an Illustrator shortcut. That's why that jumped. I think this text here, I think works well. I'm going to lock that so I don't grab it by accident. This is what I want to grab. I might, yeah, here we go. I might format this a little bit differently to potentially have it be more of, oops, yeah. Sorry, I'm being quiet here. You know, format this block slightly differently. Maybe not that big. Again, you know, maybe make it a little bit more square, obviously a little bit less clunky than this. But basically, if we had this, I'll go back. Here we go. Like basically, if we had this a little bit, you know, you could even make this whole block a tiny bit smaller. Make the text a little bit smaller, just so it's sort of more like it reads a little bit more. Like I think some of these returns are a little bit clunky to read, if that makes sense. And then as far as adding a headline, I think you could easily add a headline in here. You know, it doesn't have to be anything crazy, anything like super long or anything like that, but I think you have a good opportunity to have either even straight across or at an angle to fit sort of a headline in there. And then maybe with this intro block, maybe make these fonts a little bit larger, or even just this first block, maybe make it a little bit larger, a little bit more bold to kind of differentiate it a little bit. And then you can kind of switch back to body copy here. I think for this page, I feel like having the 2 columns kind of makes sense. I think for this page, having 2 columns might be a little bit heavy. I don't know if you did try it or not, but maybe try this block in 3 columns. So you essentially had 1 column here, 1 column here, 1 column here, and then keep that 2 columns and see if that works. I think breaking this section into 3 columns might be a little bit too much visually, but I think these 2 big blocks of text are a little bit large. I think that your breakout quote here, and again, graphics and image work really well together. And then lastly here, I might try breaking this. It makes sense this way, but I might try breaking this into 2 columns because you have 2 columns here to just sort of keep the page or keep the spread consistent. So that's why, again, here, try having this be 3 columns and this be 3 columns to keep it consistent. I know it's consistent now with the 2 columns each. I just potentially feel like that might be a little bit heavy. Like those 2 blocks might be a little bit big. It may not work with 3 columns. That might be a little too much, but I figure it's worth a shot. And then sort of lastly with this page or this spread, I might simplify this text if you haven't to sort of match, you have here, except for this one, you have solid, solid white text on the color. And then here we have more solid color. But this being an intro page, I don't mind that. Font being different than this font, but I would kind of keep it somewhat consistent to where you have like solid color background, and then you have this white with a drop shadow. Not that it looks bad, but I might, just for consistency, have it be, somewhat similar, even if it was a dark green or the same color here. Just kind of keep that consistent look. And then lastly, the only thing that you're missing is your interactivity and your publication information, which should be pretty easy to fit actually in your spreads. You can have it run across the bottom. I don't know if you've left room for that already, but if you had your previous and next arrows in the bottom corners, and then Rolling Stone, and then your publication on the bottom, and then also your page numbers, you could probably easily tuck into one of the corners on either side. So you have your page numbers added to it, but I think that information is fairly easy to add. You've done the trickier parts first. But yeah, overall, super, super strong design, excellent use of graphics to keep things dynamic. I like the use of the pull quotes, again, to add some visual interest. But yeah, I think aside from just adding the information and maybe a couple of those minor tweaks, this is a super, super strong layout. Okay. Then lastly here, we have Chase. I'll back out a little bit so you guys can see everything, and I'll scroll through. I think, again, we have a really, really strong start here. I think visually you'll see, you kind of have this image heavy left, text, or right rather, text heavy left. And then here you kind of switch it up and have a nice strong image with a column, and then a strong, and have this one a little bit more text heavy. And then kind of did the opposite here, which I like. My sort of minor I guess critique with this one is, since you have such a strong balance between image and text here, I might make this, I see why you did this, to have it like a little bit consistent. You have all this text here, image, and then you have all this text here and then image. But since you have this logo and headline, I know it's text, but it sort of reads as more as image because it's not body copy. So you have a nice visual balance here. And then I think here, it's a little bit heavy, weighted towards text. I might try playing around with the sizing of this image. Again, I know what you were doing to have it be sort of consistently visual with the first page, but I think since the first page is more of a title opening page, you can get away with having it look a little bit different from your other pages. So I might suggest this one. Where's my corner here? There we go. I might suggest, oops, I grabbed the wrong image. Here we go. I might suggest scaling this a little bit. 150 might be a little bit too much, but you can kind of see. And then, play around with placements, and then you'll have to throw a text wrap on it. I don't know if like dead center would work ish. But you kind of get the idea to kind of push that text a little bit. Even if you wanted to have, an image upper left and then text flow around it into these two columns and maybe a third column, or even have, have this image be a little bit bigger and essentially kind of take up this whole space. And then you would have, your strong 3 columns there. Just to sort of balance that visual out. Again, if I go back, oops, as I hit the wrong thing. Again, if I go back to where it was, if you zoom out, sometimes that helps to sort of see that visual balance, but you can kind of see how here, this is a little bit more balanced because of this graphic. This spread is very well balanced. The text copy and the images flow really well together, bring the viewer's eye from left to right. And then this one, again, you can see it's very text heavy. Again, minor thing, but I might play around with structuring that page just a little bit, even if you went opposite corners and had it a little bit bigger here. So you have, bottom right corner, bottom left corner, and then the text flows a little bit more. And then lastly, I really like this relatively simple graphic where you have your previous, next, and then your publication page numbers work really well. You don't need, I should say this for everybody as well. I like the graphic, but you don't need the previous and next on every single page, just on the spread. So essentially, unfortunately, you can get rid of that one. I can get rid of that one. So if that kind of wrecks your visual that you had set up that looks, ooh, as I just deleted the wrong thing. I'm trying not to select InDesign. There we go. So we'll get rid of the previous and the next there. And then now we can back out a little bit. So if that kind of, I really liked the idea of having the sort of four boxes across the bottom. I think it kind of looked cool. So if you also want to keep those 4 boxes, you absolutely can. Personally, I think it kind of works better as we go back with the 4 boxes across. What I might suggest with that is to leave 2 of them blank and just have them be a visual. So if you had this, I'll zoom in again. So if you had your actual next button and previous button be like an actual button, and then you just left these as visuals. Again, I would make sure that they're consistent. These 2 are within your margin, and then these aren't. Again, you might have to format your images. Well, not too bad actually. A little bit, but again, even if you got rid of the previous, not the whole thing, but kept graphically this block and this block, I think it might look kind of cool. What you also might want to do is make your text a little bit more noticeable. Have it, I would say, definitely a bolder font maybe, and maybe even white on red, since you have 2 dark colors. As you zoom out a little bit, it kind of gets lost. It's easy to miss those nav buttons. So I would make sure that they're, that they're definitely more visible. But yeah, I think I'm leaning towards liking it with the 4. Again, just make sure that they're consistent placement wise. But I kind of like it with those sort of 4 graphic elements, and just keeping 2 blank and then having the 2 actually be your previous and next buttons. Again, and then just make sure we have our hyperlink in there. We have bookmarks, which is great. And then obviously our buttons and forms are in there with our previous and next, which work great. Yeah, I think, some minor restructuring of that one page and then playing around with graphics as far as your navigation. I think that this works really well and is a really strong design. I think overall, everybody did a great job starting off. I think some obviously need a little bit more work than others. Try these suggestions, and as you work through these suggestions as well, you might find through your process, I stumble across things all the time that I like, and formatting that I like, kind of like by accident in air quotes. But yeah, give these a shot. We'll talk about it next class as well while we're working, and I'm looking forward to seeing your finished products.